Everything should work at the same time, really. It should. But I hope we're live. I know I always say this at the beginning of streams. Ladies and gentlemen, I know it's Matt Bailey here from the Scotch Malt Whisky Society. Good to see you all again and again. So thank you so much for being a part of this. I want to make sure that our stream is working, however, so bear with me a moment. It probably says I am, so it probably says I'm live, which is good news. Okay. Alex says yes. That's a yes. We're live. We've been live for 22 seconds or something on my screen, so that's a good start. Ladies and gentlemen, welcome. Welcome to the stream. My name's Matt Bailey. I'm the National Ambassador for the Scotch Malt Whisky Society. I go live every single day, which is always a lot of fun, doing live streams for our members, for guests, for everyone who wants to tune in, learn a thing or two about whiskey, learn about the journey of whiskey, the community of whiskey. I'm sorry if it's a little bit shaky today. My setup is in flux at the moment. This office is a nightmare. I'm resetting things at the moment because I've done a year of nightly live streams with the usual setup, which needs to change. So change is a good thing, and I really appreciate that. Speaking of change, we have two guests tonight, which I'm really excited that they're on with us. We're going to talk about their journey, some of the more recent change they've experienced, which is all part of the journey of whiskey, of course. So might I introduce Billie-jean and Dan Woolley. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Hi guys.
Here they are. So this is great. This is great. So thank you so much for being for joining me in tonight. This is I'd like to start by getting an understanding of who you are, where it's all come from, and where you're sitting right now. So let's start with the immediate present. Where are you right now compared to maybe even where you were a year ago? So where are you?
So we're staying at home at the moment, in front of hundreds of whiskies. But a year ago today, we were actually landing in Scotland, and we got married there just a year ago. So
happy anniversary! Yeah. Happy anniversary! This is amazing. Am I interrupting your anniversary dinner right now? It's a 7 o'clock stream.
No, it's Friday. Today is the anniversary that we landed in Scotland, and we drove from Glasgow to Inverary, stayed at my friend's hotel, the George Hotel in Inverary, and then we made the pilgrimage over on the ferry to the most spectacular, wonderful, amazing whiskey island on the face of the earth.
Awesome. This is great to have you on tonight. So I'm going to start with your early journeys of where it all came from and where you are now. So we'll get to what that H means on your t-shirt in just a moment. But I want to start with the early part of your journeys for both of you. So Billy, do you want to give us a bit of a rundown where your journey in whiskey started, where it all began for you?
So my whiskey journey, I've always loved whiskey. Like I was one of those weird 18-year-olds that actually enjoyed it. But I didn't really start getting into it until I started working at the Gresham. So I was part of the opening team there. And I did about 3.5 years there in total. And once I started to learn more about it, I just, had a massive appreciation for it and became a bit obsessed about it. And
Ryan has that effect on people as well, working at the Gresham, I'm sure.
Yeah.
Too much American whiskey, Ryan. You heard it here first. Drink more Scotch whiskey. Bam. Anyway. And Dan, in your history, now you've got I know parts of it, but many of our listeners, many of our audience might not. So give us a rundown where your history came from in it.
I need to give you the condensed version because I could speak all night about my history and my upbringings when it comes to whiskey. But I definitely have my father to thank for it. Some might say to blame for it. He was a district court judge and he drank lots and lots of whiskey. And at the age of around about 11 years old, he used to make me nose and taste all of his whiskey. I absolutely hated it until I got to sort of mid-teens and I started to develop a little bit of a love and appreciation more so of the flavors in general, the aromas and the flavors. And then I started drinking lots of American whiskey, as most Australian warm-blooded males do, and started working in the bar full-time at the age of 21, and I started to become really obsessed with whiskey. By the time I was in my late 20s, I already had a huge collection of 50, 60 whiskies at home, which nobody had, like not a single soul in the world. This is going back about 17, 18 years now. And I drank nothing but whiskey. And probably about 13, 14 years ago, I made my first trip over to Scotland, and that was it. I was hooked. I came back from Scotland from a couple of distilleries, and I committed my entire life to nothing but whiskey from there on in, representing quite a few different whiskey brands. I was the first Glenfiddich ambassador when William Grant set up their office. I launched the Snow Phoenix, and I actually launched Monkey Shoulder in Australia.
Oh, there you go.
I then worked closely with Diageo for a while, with Sven and Behind Bars. I worked with the Classic Malts of Scotland, and then worked with a few other companies before opening a couple of my own whiskey bars, and then slotted into the National Whiskey Ambassador for Beam Suntory, which for me was a dream come true. And some would say the most incredible, amazing, fantastic job in the world. And it was until now.
Yeah, well, we'll get back to the now in a moment. So you were responsible for launching Monkey Shoulder in Australia. Is that what you said?
I was.
You see, that in itself is a huge accomplishment if you think about it, because that's a product that is massive in the market, spawned on by what the blended malt scene these days as well. So that's quite incredible within itself. I didn't actually let everyone know this. I don't even know if I've told Dan this yet, but I actually do have I've got an early photo of Dan, which I promised to embarrass him with during this session, if he's okay with that. You're gonna have to give us some context about where these photos come from. They're not embarrassing, but they are definitely. It's just to embarrass you. But here we go. If everyone wants to have a look at this photo here, maybe give us some context of what you were talking about here. We're standing with Chris Middleton. Cool.
I'm not 100% sure. I think that's a Whiskey Live, actually. It's either a Whiskey Live or a Whiskey Show.
That's the Champs. It's the Champs.
Very, very long time ago. That must be a decade ago, I'd say now. And I would say by the glass in my hand that we're drinking whiskey.
Yeah, you could probably say that. And of course, your other marvelous days in your modeling career, of course.
Yeah, there we go. That was me. As we know, when you work in a distillery, all you do is wear a suit and tie, especially when you're moving casks around.
Yeah, there we go. Evening legends, evening all from everyone who's tuning in. Thank you so much. David, Taylor, Ross, Anderson, Adrian, Graham, Tim, Ross, Lee, Irina, Nick, Glenn, John, Steve, Craig, Rob, Andrew, everyone who's tuning in. Thank you so much for being a part of tonight. There's a lot of people tuning in, which is great because it's the star power of Billie-jean and Dan tonight, which is great. So let's just fast forward to your Beam Suntory days for a moment. Where did that, what year did that sort of kick off, and what did that involve?
2014. So just before then, I moved to Byron Bay to open a whiskey bar called the Roadhouse.
Yep.
And after that, I was actually headhunted by Beam Suntory and CCA, the exchange, to start up the exchange and to start a whiskey ambassador program for on-trade and off-trade. And it was consumers and bartenders. It was a mix of everything. And Julian Train and Bill Boucher and a few others, Michael Nouri and myself, helped to write the program and set it up. And I started off first as the Queensland and Northern New South Wales ambassador, but within it was less than 6 months, I was national ambassador, and really took the reins with it because they were brands that I truly loved and adored. And before I even started in the role, I had become quite good friends with Mr. John Campbell. And I'd just gotten back from the distillery, and nowadays John is one of my closest friends. John was the best man at our wedding, and for me, it was such a huge honour to represent Lefroy. It will always be the #1 distillery in the world for me. I love so many distilleries from so many places around the world, but there's only one Lefroy. There'll never be another Lefroy. I absolutely love and adore it, and it's somewhere that Billy and I will end up going there, if not every year, every second year for the rest of our lives. And it's
maybe not this year with current circumstances.
definitely not this year. Yeah. I feel sorry. We were invited to John Campbell's 50th birthday, which was about 4-5 weeks ago.
Sure.
And he's had to postpone his 50th birthday, which is a bit of a shame, but
Yeah.
I'm sure we'll get round to sharing a dram with him soon.
Yeah, indeed. It's quite funny. I think a lot of the especially younger whiskey crowd, would probably know you as, for a long time, has known you as sort of Mr. Lefroy for a long time. It's because, I mean, even if we just to remark on that for a moment, I mean, what the whiskey scene in Australia, the appreciation scene of whiskey looked like in 2014 versus what it looks like today. That in itself is incredible what's happened there.
It is. And then even if you go back 4, 5, 6 years before 2014, when I launched Snow Phoenix, that was, I think, 2010. So it's a decade ago now. That was one of the first amazing, incredible whiskies that was a collectible, super rare, sought after whiskey. And I think that helped to change the landscape and the scenery of what whiskey was, that it brought to light the fact that people were actually buying whiskey to collect, not just drink. So that's another whole nother argument there, I suppose.
Yeah, that's a whole nother kettle of fish. I mean, Billy, were you ever into whiskey collecting per se, or was it if you always just about good drinking?
I honestly, I don't own a lot of stuff. I'm not into collecting whiskey.
No.
I've always enjoyed going to a bar and sitting and making my way through, and I get more enjoyment out of that than sitting at home with one bottle. For me, I don't know, it's just about being out at a bar for me as well.
Billy does buy bottles of whiskey, but they never last long.
But I drink
She
them.
always
Always
drinks them. See, I try and do the same thing, but when you get your collection up to well over 1,000 bottles, then it kind of becomes hard to.
Hoarding though, that's.
Well, especially if you ever have to move house.
I've moved the collection many times. It's actually moved cities. The whole collection's probably moved over 10 times now, I'd say.
Yeah, right. Before we press on, let's have a dram because there's plenty to talk about here.
Do it.
All right. So tell us about this whiskey, my friend.
Oh, which one are we starting with? Here we go. We're going with 10.183, Velociraptor versus Xenomorph, a 14-year-old sherried whiskey from the SMWS, of which you've been a member you've been a member of the society for a long time, actually. It's I'd say probably close to 10 years, if not more.
Yeah.
But
Yeah, I'm still quite surprised that I haven't been kicked out yet, to be honest. Not through lack of trying.
You have to try pretty hard to get kicked out, don't worry.
Yeah.
So I've pulled one just here. It's a 14-year-old. It's a refill sherry, and it's one of the notes that the panel made about this whiskey was it was called Velociraptor versus Xenomorph. And what I love about that is it was a battle between spirit and cask in this one. It was like the sherry was pushing the spirit sometimes, and the spirit was pushing the sherry, and it's still unmistakably from Distillery 10. It's still unmistakably that profile from that other distillery. But in this case, it's nice to get something.
Do we know? Is it Oloroso? Do we know? Because it's got a kind of a bit of a funk to it.
It was a refill Oloroso.
Right.
Yeah.
What a super overripe pineapple. Super pineapple and tropical.
Almost semi-rotting pineapple.
Yeah.
Like it's got a beautiful note to it. This distillery means so much to both Billy and myself, and we love Bunna. Bunna for us, it's very, very symbolic. We collect the hand-filled Bunnas, so they're one of our favourite all-time drinking whiskies. And the first bottle of whiskey that Billy ever bought me, going back, I would say probably 5 years now, was a bottle of Bunna as well. So it holds a special place in our heart.
Mm-hmm.
And where along the whiskey journey did you guys meet?
So he was actually doing a masterclass at the Gresham, and that was back in the Macallan days.
Macallan and Highland Park masterclass it was. Yep.
Yeah.
Yeah, sure.
Yeah.
Billy was helping out, and she just instantly fell in love with my boy's charms and
Instantly.
devilish good looks, and I still can't believe I pulled it off. Cheers,
Very cool. Yeah, Kyle says settled in for another episode of Matt TV. There we go. And Ian Scott remarked on your photo from the championships saying, no whiskey on the hand. It must be an old photo. Yeah, it must be. I don't know what year it is, but it's pre that. Andy Davis says, hey, Dan, we looked for you at Dramfest this year. Did you make it? I think Dan's had some pretty big projects on the boil, which we're going to talk about. So maybe that's why he didn't make Dramfest this year. And Rowan says, hi, Billy. Did you work at the Lord Byron recently? I swear I was up there talking to her about whiskey and her starting her own brand about 3 months ago. Well. What are the odds that we're having this chat right now, Rowan? There you go. And Conrad says, hello to you both from David Taylor. I don't know who Conrad is, but Conrad with a K. It might be a mutual friend.
Conrad from Jura. He lives on Jura. He's an absolute legend. We love Conrad. He's very, very good friend.
Very cool. Very cool. Thank you to everyone who's tuning in. Jane, Vanessa, Christian, Emily, Caleb, El Tote, aka Jose Dimmenstein. Good to see you, Jose. and Suzuki Santoro. Good to see you. And Squire says, you are one lucky man, Dan. I'd say the same. So let's talk. Whilst we're enjoying that 10183, let's talk about where you are currently. Then, what's So you're surrounded by a collection behind you, and you've also recently tell us what that H means on your T-shirt there.
So we just launched our own whiskey brand called Highwayman, and Highwayman is a liquid collection of my whiskey journey throughout Australia so far. The first cask that we filled, actually, Billy and I were in Tassie together, and it was in 2016, and we were visiting Old Kempton and Redland. It's one of those distilleries that has two names, Redlands and Old Kempton.
Yeah, Old Kempton, sure, at the time, yeah.
And we in 2016, I literally got 3 casks and matured 2 of them down there and 1 of them in Byron. And when they were just over 2.5 years old, roundabout, I tipped them all, married them all together, and gave them a second maturation in a wine cask as well up here in Byron. And that was the first release of Highwayman. So over the last 5 years or so, we've been putting down different barrels, and it got to the stage where I had quite a bit of whiskey down, quite a few barrels, and I bought a mash tun and a still from the Adams boys when they upgraded and brought it up to Byron Bay. And we have all of that set up at Lord Byron Distillery, which is owned by Brian Restall and his family. It's a family-run rum distillery. We became quite good friends. Billy works there full-time. And we set it all up there. And now we just filled cask number 50.
You've brought Wash and your gear into Lord Byron Distillery. Is that what you're saying?
I brought the mash tun and the still into Lord Byron, and now we make whiskey there and we age it there. So
very cool.
When I release batches 6, 7, 8, 9, and 10, late July, early August, coming into the end of the year, they'll be the last batches of independent bottlings, and then we'll go straight into Highwayman whiskey that we've made ourselves, which is a pretty good segue into
new make.
The next.
Yes. Okay. So we've got some. This live stream, ladies and gentlemen, for those who are tuned in live right now, which is quite a lot of people, you're watching live with myself, Matt Bailey, tuned in with Billie-jean and Dan Woolley, who have tuned in from Byron Bay. We did sync this up. So this is not just me messaging Dan earlier today being like, hey, do you want to do a live tonight? This is us a couple of weeks in the making, really, because it's making. Get it, make. Anyway, so we've got some Highwayman new make here. So it says now, it's crudely labelled, but it does say 2/3 51 ppm Scotland, 1/3 New South Wales. 55% ABV. I have so many questions about that, about what's going on that. So I'm going to ask by saying, this is Australian new make. It's 2/3 Scottish barley and 1/3 New South Wales barley. Is that correct?
Correct.
And it's a peated new make. Correct. And it's now I'm going to ask about the 55%. So it's obviously coming off the still at 70 something, and then
I can tell you it's actually, oh no, we've got the 55%. I've got another sample over there. It's coming off the still. Once we take the hearts, the last one that we did was 67.1. So we're taking the cut, the late cut, super late, to get a lot of those really heavy, intense phenolic compounds that really like to hang around in the bottom. 55 for us is really symbolic. The first few casks that I filled, we were filling at 63.4 because that's what they do in Tassie. Why do they do it in Tassie? Because that's what they do in Scotland. Why do they do it in Scotland? Because they've been doing it forever. So we're not making that kind of whiskey. We're making something new. So I started to challenge that. I spoke to quite a few people. I spoke to David Vitale, who fills all his casks at 55.
55, yeah. I was about to say Star would fill at 55, and I thought it's a very interesting. They see also in their vein, they also used to fill at 63.4 in the early days, and now they fill at 55 as well, which I find is interesting because it creates a different spirit entirely.
It's softer. It really is.
Yeah, it's less aggressive. And
In that vein, what I find interesting is that, Billy, you're distilling this, aren't you? You're like, this is kind of your work here, isn't it?
yes.
And this is at 55. There's two questions I have. Like, it's the opposite of where the rest of like the lot of Scottish industry is going, where they're moving even to 69.9 and 70.1 fills into casks. If you look at Ben Rothus and Macallan and whatnot, that's kind of the de rigueur now. Whereas in Australia, we're seeing like a few more distilleries pushing 55, 58 into casks instead.
Yeah.
Are you worried about maturing more, like maturing water? Is that a concern?
Not really. I mean, the whole point of us, you probably already realized, but of us diluting it down a little bit further is so that we're not having that super aggressive wood interaction that happens when you put a high proof spirit into the cask, and it's stripping away all the tannins and everything. It's a lot softer approach doing the 55%. With the aging water thing, we're still kind of learning about how the evaporation is working with the angel share. There is, with one of the casks, we lost a lot of alcohol. And then with another one, we lost more water than alcohol. So
generally speaking, though, the ABV is going up just ever so slightly.
It's my completely unbiased tasting on that is it's herbal. It's got like a herbal note to it, like a 5-spice note, but it's also got this lovely just this whiff of like almost like a rum perfume, which is floral, but like almost like a fresh lipstick, kind of like a bit of Jamaican rum kind of note, a bit of a rummy note to the make, which is unusual.
It's so funny that you say that, because we actually do our first part of the ferment. So we do like an open ferment and then at the end a closed ferment.
Right.
But where we do,
and you're in a rum distillery doing an open ferment.
So we're doing the ferment on the same level that we're aging the rum barrels. So I really do believe that is going to have an influence on the ferment.
I think for me, the main driving component of filling at 55 was the first few batches and few casks were actually stripping bitter tannic notes and maturing the whiskey so aggressively and so fast that it was becoming overly tannic and overly woody very, very quickly. I then pulled it back after a few conversations with a couple of different people, David Vitale, as I mentioned, and I found that dropping it to 55 was just a much gentler, sleepy ride for the casks. It was just softer in general.
Yeah. That's a lovely spirit.
style.
So big ups to you, Billy, and big ups to you, Dan, because that's a remarkable spirit. Because I
It's
first
exciting.
nosed it. Yeah, I first nosed it. I was saying to you just before we went live, you asked me if I'd tried any of these samples that you sent. And I hadn't, and I'd only nosed the new make, and I just sort of went, "Oh, that's got like a whiff of sort of herbal peat going on there," but I hadn't really actually put it into a glass yet and had a proper evaluation of it. So I really appreciate that. Thank you.
My pleasure.
So let's look at sort of where you are now then, as we were just talking about, but also the future of your distillery, which is where I'll start. So you're expanding out at the moment. Like you're obviously it's a really smart idea to start with some other spirit, to start with sourced spirit, for lack of a better phrase, as you said, some old Kempton spirit and some others that you might be able to tell us more about. But and then you'll have your own releases after the Highwayman 10th or something. Did you say?
Correct. So as we hit batch, I'm not sure yet whether I'm going to split a couple of the batches. It'll either be batch 11 or batch 12.
Yep.
It'll start to be batch 2.1, and it'll be stuff that we actually made from grain all the way through to bottle in Byron Bay 100%.
Mm. And has there been any whiskey distilleries in Byron Bay before to remark on, or?
No, we're the first. There are quite a few now, which is really exciting. It's actually starting to take the structure of almost being a region in the next 5 years. Husk have started to put down some whiskey casks, and they have beautiful still, the first Forsyth still ever made and commissioned and put to work in Australia is at Husk.
Yeah. And
then
they're a rum distillery, aren't they, mostly?
They do rum and gin.
Yeah, it's a agricole style rum.
Yeah,
I remember tasting them at a rum day thing last year. Yeah.
And then we also have Brookies.
Brookies, of course, yeah.
Yeah, Mr. Jim McEwen came out to help set up.
Yeah.
Winding Roads.
Oh, yep, they're doing whiskey
in Ballina.
Yeah, there's a few now.
Yeah, so it's exciting times ahead.
Yeah, I tasted Brookie's macadamia, their macadamia liqueur. I thought it was fantastic. They should stick with that.
They've put down over 100 barrels of whiskey now.
Yeah.
So,
yeah, wow.
Yeah, they've got a lot going on.
Yeah, they're all 100% bourbon casks, and they've put down over 100 now. So
that's exciting. Yeah, that sounds like Jim would advise on as well, isn't it? Yeah.
Yeah.
There's actually a question coming through from Craig here. He asks, how peated is your juice, Dan? As in ppm, or is it Scottish peat, mainland, or Isla, or what? So a bit more detail.
So it's super confusing, which is the way I like it. It is 2/3 Scottish Northern Highland peat, but the peat itself comes from just near the Wolfburn distillery. So it's way up north, right up the top of the Northern Highlands. And it's quite it's got an almost seaside note to it, similar to, I suppose, like an Oban.
Right.
It is peated to 51 ppm.
That's quite high.
Mm-hmm.
But then we literally mix it 2/3 Scottish to 1/3 local New South Wales pale malt.
Right.
And yeah, we mill it together, mash it together, ferment it together, and distill it together. So it's 2/3 to 1/3, but 100% Australian.
Yeah, right. Okay. It is confusing. Well done.
It is. It's and at the end of the day, I really don't give a shit, because we're making whiskey to be delicious. I don't care if people whinge and whine and carry on. And at the end of the day, for me, it's all about flavour. There's nothing else driving it.
Late last night, I was lucky to be sitting in on a session with Dr. Sam Simmons, and he was saying that there's all this there's often all that discussion around what's the ppm and what's this, and people like to dig into those stats, but it doesn't tell you anything about the flavor.
No, it doesn't.
Stats never tell you anything about flavor, and it's always a bit sort of like the stats are important, but they're not the be all and end all, and you can lose track of what the flavor of the spirit. And like I said to you, I hadn't only nosed a sample bottle. I actually have come around to the Andrew Durbidge method of understanding spirit, and he's taught me a lot. He never knows his bottles because he doesn't think he can learn much from that. It's always a bit like, well, that doesn't tell me anything about how that spirit actually noses and tastes.
Yeah.
So it's in a glass that makes sense to nose and taste it in, makes sense to nose and taste it in.
Has to be for me as well. Has to be.
That's the same for that new make for me. It's like there's so much more going on once I've let it sit in the glass for a moment.
Yeah.
I love drinking new make because it tells me so much about the spirit character that you're working on.
Yeah.
And the actually the style you're going for. And we'll talk style in a moment. I want to talk casks with you for a moment as well. There's a couple of questions coming through. Squire Ross asks, is Highwayman going to stop after the 12th batch? Or is it just going to be, are you going to maintain that brand for post Highwayman batch 12?
You'll never be able to stop the Grim Reaper. It's going to be around forever and ever.
Jeremy, I'm going to come back to that question. Don't forget, I won't forget. And Rob Akers asks, are you aiming for a consistent style batch to batch, or are you happy to take a different direction with each one? That's a really good question.
So what do you think, Matt?
That's a good question because I feel like there is a bit of consistency with the style, but they're all so different. And not just different from batch to batch, but so different from any other Australian whiskey or any whiskey I've ever tried before.
Yeah, I think so too.
There is that distinguishing character.
You can tell that it's Highwayman when you drink it.
Yeah, but I think variety is what you're going for, isn't it?
I think for the first few years, I would say at least until 2022, maybe 2023, a lot of the whiskies will be batch to batch to batch will be quite different, although still unmistakably Highwayman. But eventually, coming into 2024, 2025, we will probably have 3 main lines, main SKUs, main whiskies, and then anywhere between 8 to 12 special releases every year as well.
Yep.
I don't know whether we'll ever release a single cask, to be honest. I find, which is something...
Not yet.
Not yet. Something that I found quite interesting, actually, working in distilleries all the way around the world, and then tasting through different warehouses, that you can taste 100 casks in a warehouse, and sometimes not one of them are worth actually being bottled by themselves to be called a brilliant example of what that distillery is displaying. Where if you vat these casks together, then you're going to get an absolutely beautiful symphony of what that distillery is trying to create. On the other hand, people like Scotch Malt Whisky Society or Adelphi or independent bottlers that come across mind-numbingly fantastic single casks have the advantage of being able to pick and choose from cask to cask, or actually getting thousands and thousands of litres of spirit and hand selecting incredible casks and aging it themselves. So I think eventually we will do a single cask, but it'll probably take quite a few years.
Yeah. Okay. So once you reach sort of a certain benchmark with your own spirit and creating a marriage of casks that makes sense to create a consistently good single malt, maybe then down the track it might be a discussion, but it's way too early to have that. But there is a question related to that. There's one other one which I want to jump on first, however, which is John Yanowski says, jealous, I love that new make. Very cool. And Vidal Chacon asks, what's the distillate from batches 1 to 5, if you're allowed to disclose?
I'll disclose some of them. Some of them I will give hints that I will allude to revealing later with further batches, because it all makes sense once the big reveal comes. As I just mentioned before, batch 1 is Redland Estate, Old Kempton. Batch 2 is a renowned New South Wales distillery, and it's not Archie Rose.
A renowned New South Wales. See, the joke here is, of course, for those who want to play along with this one, there was a TIB release from Tasmanian Independent Bottlers And by the way, hi, Louis Duckett, who's just tuned in. There's a release from TIB with a renowned New South Wales distillery, which may or may not have been a distillery in Rosebery. But this is a bit different. This is not a...
Sorry, this is Louis just jumped up. We named our dog after Louis Duckett. And he just jumped up to say hi. He thought we were calling him when we said hi, Louis.
Louis, did you get that, huh? Okay, well, so Glenn Duncan asks, I've always loved the magic of the barrels. Do you have a core range and what barrel and aged or no age statement or what? So, yeah.
At the moment, we have, I think it's 16 or 17 different barrel types.
Right.
Which is pretty crazy.
That's pretty crazy.
Yeah, it is. It is unbelievable. Just when you look at the American whiskey barrels, I have wheated bourbon barrels. I have low rye bourbon barrels. I have high rye bourbon barrels, and I have rye whiskey barrels.
Yeah,
that's just when it comes to American.
Yeah. Louis Duckett says, "Is that Dan Woolley from Dark Valley?" Question mark. So I think he just got you back on that one. So that's
all right. I've got something for Louis. It's right here. Hold on. There it is.
That one's just for you, Louis, and that's not for the rest of our audience. I promise you. Okay, so
we've got in front of us these Duckett buckets. Louis actually carried these from Tassie to Isla for us. So thanks, mate. You can carry many more things over the next few decades for us too.
Okay, before this turns into a bashing Louis Duckett session, let's pour another dram. What have we got?
Another 10. Sorry, Billy's just letting Louis outside.
Okay, that's all good.
Louis dog.
So let's pour a 10.188, I reckon.
So what's the cask on this? This is another 14-year-old?
It's a 14-year-old, and it's also refill sherry, but it's remarkably different from the 10.183. So I'm guessing that the 183 was quite an inactive sherry cask. This one's quite active, and was sitting at 62.5%, and it drinks like liquid silk, in my opinion. The mouthfeel on this one was just unbelievable.
That's incredible. This is our pussycat.
There's more pets.
Yeah. This is Whiskey. Whiskey.
Hello, Whiskey.
Yeah, she's very surly.
Okay. Whilst we're having a nose and taste of that 10.188.
Wow. That's my...
Oh, we're losing you a little bit there. All right, got you. We're good.
They look squishy. My head's all squishy.
Oh, head's all squishy.
Wow, that is a beautiful single Oloroso, isn't it? Did you say refill?
Yeah, it's surprisingly that's refill, but it's actually
very active.
A very active refill. Maybe when they say refill, it may have been a second fill. So,
it's beautiful.
We'll talk more about casks as we're enjoying that. But Jeremy Young from Lark Distillery, good to see you, mate. Jeremy asks, hey Dan and Billy, good to see your virtual faces. Where would you like to see the Highwayman in 5 years from now? Also, why is it named Highwayman? So we could start with the second question first. Where's the name come from?
Well, the name more than anything symbolizes the last decade or so and my journey across every highway, not just in Australia, but throughout the world, traveling every highway on a whiskey journey. And every single drop of the first 10 batches or so have made their way into Byron Bay on highways. And let's face it, I mean, I think I'm a bit of a highwayman when it comes to whiskey in general. There's always got to be a black sheep in every organisation or every family. And I think I wear that black woolly sheep stigma quite well.
So the name's quite personal then, in a way. It's something that, you know, it's part of your story, part of your journey that we started this conversation about. It
is. And funny we should talk about the name, because I've had a lot of people ask me what the symbolism of the Grim Reaper is. And the Highwayman brought death, you know, your money or your life. And I want people to realise that this This whiskey is all, except for batch 2, we brought down a little bit, but it's all very, very serious whiskey. It is all cask strength, and it's serious stuff. And if you know about alcohol is actually a poison. So, you need to treat all of these whiskies with respect, or they will disrespect you. You know, the Grim Reaper is something that is part of life. You know, life and death are two inevitable. You know, death is always going to be there, and it's something that I think with whiskey you need to remember that this stuff is deadly. You need to treat it with respect. Always remember that you need to treat it with high respect, or you may end up in a deadly hangover like I was last Sunday.
Deadly hangover.
Oh yeah.
Sunday's the day, if any, to have a deadly hangover. Andy Milne from South Trade says, incredible cask selection. Are you planning to blend those?
Well, every release that we've done so far have been casks married together and then given a second maturation in something completely different.
Right.
Which is very much not traditional.
But if we find a cask that is, if we taste it and think that's perfect just the way it is, then we'll bottle it.
Yeah.
But
yeah.
But married together as a batch, not a single cask. But we haven't crossed that road yet.
Yeah, okay. Louis says, I feel so special now. And he also then said, who knew Dan was so edgy? Louis. Okay, look. Rowan says when he spoke to Billy, it was one of the original ideas was to be ghost distilling or something like that. So we've gone through a few iterations. Yeah.
That's the business name.
That is the business name.
All right. Okay. I'm mistaken. Sorry. Okay.
Yep.
Ghost distilling. Right.
Yeah, because we ghost distill in other distilleries. So as I mentioned, batch two,
like gypsy distilling, but ghost distilling, sure.
Exactly. Batch 2 is distilled in a renowned New South Wales distillery, but I actually distilled it. I distilled it myself. I made the cuts. I filled the casks. And batch 3 and 5 are both from the Adams distillery. And I loved the new make and the casks so much that I bought the still.
Yep.
Batch 4 is from a renowned South Australian distillery that has been through a couple of different movements and has been in the news lately. And let's just say that this is probably the cheapest you'll ever find it in your entire life.
Yeah, or find it at all.
Yes, very much so.
So say no more. Matt Whisker, Kevin Kwan, Kent Fisher, Jimmy Martin, Julian Viard, good to see you all. Okay, well, talking about casks and talking about blending, we've sort of skirted the edges a bit here. I've noticed that a lot of the Highwayman releases have been quite dark. I mean, they've been matured in X, I'm guessing. Do you want to give us a rundown of kind of the cask makeup of what you've been using so far at the
super casks?
Yeah, so all of them are actually matured in either a first maturation or second maturation in something very special that myself, Crafty, and Christy Lark have been working with Andrew Young from the Seppeltsfeld Cooperage.
Yep.
He's been experimenting with us on something called a super cask. And what this is taking a cask. So far, they've always been wine or fortified wine casks and charring them to at least 2 levels beyond level 5. So it is a charring to within an inch of its life. Now, not only does this impact the flavour, but it also impacts the colour through the excess carbon. It is something that you'll see come out through our releases over the next 6, 12, 18, 24 months. And you'll see that we actually have some dry red wine, French oak dry red wine from the Barossa that's had a heavy char, super heavy char. And it's not coming out like a wine. It's coming out like a fortified, somewhere halfway between muscat and tawny. It's bizarre and it's unique and it's fantastic. And what's the most important thing? It's delicious.
Mm. There's one thing we didn't touch on just then, however, which we're getting a few questions about, is cask size. So Andy Milne and a couple of others have talked cask size here. There's been a few discussions on this live stream and on the Whiskey Roundtable and a few other streams about cask sizes. So tell us a bit more about that. So where did that start? Where are you looking at? What are you looking at mostly filling into? Your wood policy on cask size, if you like.
At the moment, predominantly we're filling 100-litre casks.
Okay.
But each time we do a run, we're getting about 240, 250 litres.
Mm.
So that excess, I'm filling either 20s, 40s or 50s. We have, at the moment, 20-litre casks, 25-litre casks, 35-litre casks, 40-litre casks, 50-litre casks, 100-litre casks, and I'm just about to take 2 225-litre casks. So I just want to experiment as much as possible. And it's, as everybody will see over the next decade, there's no bad whiskey. It's all, even if there's something that I'm not 100% happy with, I can steer it in a different direction. So it's experimenting, but it's things that you can actually fix. And that's, I think, something that I learned from Mr. Timothy Duckett, Senior H, not Junior H.
Junior H, not Junior H.
Yeah. And he's taught me probably more than anyone, probably him and John Campbell, I'd say, would be the two main influences when it comes to whiskey. And he's taught me that whiskey actually develops over time, and it gets better and it gets worse, and it plateaus and it gets better and it gets worse. But you can take a whiskey that you're not necessarily super happy with, and you can steer it in a different direction, and it will take on a whole new dimension.
Okay, so looking at this is sort of we should pour another whiskey. Actually, I'm really keen to try one of your batches before I head into the next line of questions. So I'm happy to keep a bit of my 10-188 aside because I'm going to enjoy that. So I've got batch 7 and batch 8 of Highwayman in my office here. I think I've accidentally leaked that I had these in my office to a few people online, and they said, "Oh, tell us what it's like. Tell us what it's like." I said, "I can't yet. It's on Tuesday night." So these are upcoming releases of Highwayman. Is that correct?
Correct.
Okay, so I'm going to start with 7 because it comes before 8.
Well,
I'm reading the comments at the same time as about to pour this, and I just saw Louis Duckett write, "I taught Tim everything he knows."
Oh,
Louis. Mate, I think it's a bit past your bedtime, isn't it? All right, here we go. I'm going to try a bit of batch 7 here. I'm going to first remark on the fact that it is very, very ruby red in color. Wow. So tell us a bit about this. What have we got here?
So this is 3 American oak, heavy char, ex-tawny, all 50 litres, all just over 3 years old, and then tipped together. And for me, it's just outstanding. The first 5 batches I actually gave second maturations to, but when I married these casks together and I nosed and tasted it, it doesn't need any work. It is, I truly believe it is one of the finest Australian tawny cask matured whiskies I've ever come across. It's outstanding.
So on the topic of tawny and casks, just touching on that just for a moment whilst we're enjoying this. We're often seeing, as a trend I see with a lot of new Australian distilleries and a lot of Australian distilleries in general, is there's a lot of discussion and focus on the cask rather than the spirit. Now, there are some buck that trend, of course, like if I'm to single out a couple here and there, it'd be the likes of Fleurieu, it'd be the likes of Archie Rose, who've put development into different barley strains, different development of spirit, different yeast and everything like that. Where does that sit for you in both for Highwayman and for the broader Australian whiskey industry as well?
Well, for me, I've got into this argument many, many times with many different people, and I'm trying to go for a whiskey that is heavily influenced by the cask. I'm not going for a fine balance between spirit and cask. I'm going to take a magnificent spirit, and then I am really going to stomp all over it with amazing, intense, really, really hardcore cask flavors to create something
like super cask before and tawny cask and all these kind of like rich wine casks.
Correct. I firmly believe that if you're making a youngish whiskey and you want to be able to taste a specific grain or a specific yeast, and you want to release something that's 2.5, 3.5 years old in a colder climate in just bourbon or refill bourbon because you want to get that balance, that's fine. But if you are creating something that is big and bold, you know, like a Macallan style that are really influenced heavily by the cask, then for me, I don't believe that yeast strains and barley strains are as important. Having said that, I still firmly believe you need to start off with a magnificent spirit to end with a magnificent whiskey.
Yeah.
What do you think? So Billy's my distiller. Billy
is the distiller here.
The process, and then I ruin it with the casks.
I sort of agree. Like, I think with what we're doing, definitely it's not as important to focus on the yeast and all that sort of thing, because
you really haven't had the opportunity yet as Ghost.
No, we haven't done a lot of experimentation with different yeasts and that sort of thing. I am really interested in doing that, and I want to explore that as much as possible. But like you said, there's not a lot of point when the cask is taking over so much of the flavor. But of course, yes, you do need to start with an amazing spirit.
You need to start with a great foundation, sure.
Yeah. Exactly. Yeah. So we're just trying to nail our fermentation and distillation, and then once we get that down, we'll start experimenting a little bit more, I think. But it is really the casks that are the star of the show with the Highwayman whiskey.
Yep. And do you anticipate that to be how Highwayman whiskey looks even when it's your own spirit, for the casks to be the star of that show?
I think so.
I think so.
Well, we know you, Dan. I was asking Billy that. Shut up.
I think so. We both love heavy sherry. We really do.
I think we're with the spirit, we're going for obviously something quite meaty and masculine and oily and the phenolic,
pungent, intense. Yeah.
So I think all that stuff is important. So that's going to really make a big impact on the way that it interacts with the cask. But that's, I guess it's adding to the mouthfeel and the body and the texture and everything else.
Yeah, the finish and viscosity.
Yeah.
Craig asks, and he says, we may have missed this earlier, how long is your ferment?
So it's a really long ferment.
Possibly the longest in the industry.
Well, you said it's half open, top half closed. Is that correct?
Yes. So we keep it open for about 4 days.
Right.
Goes pretty crazy. And then it starts to really slow down. We put the top on it and it sits for another week. But yeah, we started off with over 2 week ferments. Yeah. But we've refined it back and we're doing
between 10 to 12 days, depending on the temperature.
Yeah. It's a little bit hard to manage in Byron Bay because of our climate.
Yeah.
Because no one's ever done it in
Yeah, so it's all experimental.
Yeah.
It's-
I was going to ask, I mean, I wonder how a 10 to 12-day ferment would look in somewhere like Byron Bay.
Yeah,
It's that's I think that's the real challenge here, isn't it?
yeah,
yeah, but it's amazing. Like at the end of the ferment, it's got such a beautiful, sharp apple, like tart apple.
and it's got so much sherbet as well.
Yeah.
The wash is delicious, absolutely delicious.
Absolutely really delicious.
Before we, you know what, I'm changing the lamp a bit here, Dan. Only because I really want to do I actually really want to do your two side by side, just because I think that makes a bit more sense. Because the 10-190 is quite peated, so I don't want to trample on any of the nuance that comes out of your batch 8.
What do you think of
Seven's great. So I know what you mean by cask forward, and it really is. It's the tawny note is quite pronounced, and I love that style of whiskey. It's got that sort of like it is quite cask forward. Yeah, I like it. Thank you. I'm quite excited for 8 though, because I also like the lighter styles. So that the color is on this one is perhaps more my bag of tricks.
Yeah, this is the first bourbon cask release, and it is, yeah, it's really good. It's sawdust and intense vanilla and cinnamon coming through, but tropical fruit as well. There's pineapple coming through. It's very tasty.
You know what this is? Has anyone here had that American cinnamon toast crunch, that cereal? That's what this is in a glass. This is cinnamon toast crunch.
Reminds me of Cinnabuns. If you've ever had Cinnabon.
Cinnabon,
Yeah, syrup, dark syrup, and, brown sugar and cinnamon and doughy. And
I'm just reminded of that joke that Louis C.K. joke of where he has a Cinnabon at the airport that he's arriving into.
It's very good. I remember that. Yeah, only in America, land of the obese.
You can get away with it. You're landing.
So much apple in that too, though. It's
like green apple and
orchard fruit. Yeah.
I'm gonna let that sit and open up for a moment. So there was a question here which was quite cool actually. So David Taylor asks, would you name any of your special releases after Australian Highwaymen?
Ooh.
Possibly.
That'd be cool.
Possibly.
I like that idea.
Yeah.
Like famous Australian Highwaymen. You could sort of name some of your special releases after them or something. There you go. That's a cool idea.
At one stage, we're actually looking at naming each of the batches after classic Australian 60s and 70s muscle cars.
The idea came from.
The muscle cars would be quite cool. But apparently I spoke to quite a few people about it, and they said that I would lead myself into legal hot waters by doing that. So
yeah, I was about to say, if you have a Highwayman Mustang release, that might cause you a bit of trouble with the Ford Motor Company, and that might be a legal battle you'd win, I'm afraid.
Maybe the Monaro and the Charger, possibly.
Well, Holden's been pushed out of business, so yeah, I mean, you could probably get away with Monaro.
Yeah.
And here's just about the most Tasmanian question ever. Jeremy Young asks, if you were to do a collaboration with Louis, what would you call it?
What would I call it?
For those who are not Louis and are not Jeremy or Billie-jean or Dan, he's talking about if Highwayman did a collaboration with Louis Duckett Junior H, what would you call it?
It'd have to be a smoke and coke.
Yeah, I think we'd definitely do some sort of smoky cokey collaboration. Yeah, I think we could come up with something pretty cool. We just have to dial his attitude back a little bit.
Sure, exactly. Yeah, well, you heard it here first. Sucked in, Louis. Dial the attitude back a bit. There you go. Would be called Man and Dog. There you go. You could call one Man and Dog. There you go.
Man and Dog. Very good. Yeah.
That's from Gary.
Oh, I thought we were talking about Louis Duckett.
We are.
Oh.
We are. Ah, dear, oh dear. So we've talked a lot about your early journey. We've talked a lot about Highwayman. And I want to really just touch on a bit of a broader scale question, going back to a broader scale question here a bit. Now, in the sense of being gypsy distillers for the first few batches, and making that spirit yourself at these distilleries, that's quite incredible, and it's not something you normally see. But now you've had it. I mean, obviously you've been involved in the whiskey scene for a long time. Where do you see, especially in Australia, what would you predict to be sort of, what does the next 5 years look like in the Australian whiskey scene? Because if we rewind, I'm going to preface this by saying, if we rewind 5-ish years, like Sullivan's Cove win that big award 2014, 2015, people actually start taking notice of Australian whiskey suddenly. It's like, oh, okay, there's more than just, a couple of releases on the shelf. An explosion of new distilleries starts up after that. There was a fair few before that, of course, but, we're talking going from, 6 distilleries in Tasmania 20 years ago to now.
For me, I'm going to answer with one word, and that is exciting.
Exciting? Okay.
Really exciting. What do you think?
Not sticking to just one certain style.
And do you think that by not having the same sort of rules that like regions like Scotch whiskey and American whiskey have, there's a bit more sort of innovation for a bit more flexibility for innovation in that area? Or
I think so. Yeah, I think the fact that we're not shackled with so many rules and regulations, and then if you compound that with the Australian attitude towards everything, we are really going to produce some world-class whiskey over the next 5 years, and within 10 years we will be a force to be reckoned with. If you just look at the sheer volume of new distilleries that are going to open in the next 5-10 years or so, there's going to be an industry that wasn't here before, and the fact that we are going to be part of that industry is really, really exciting. The fact that New South Wales has got so many distilleries and so many distilleries coming online, it's very, very cool. We were talking about how the northern rivers up here in Byron is going to become a bit of a region where people that love whiskey can actually come, spend a couple of days, spend a weekend here, and visit 4 or 5 different distilleries and go to different cellar doors and taste and see amazing stuff going on. And it's just a truly exciting time, I think.
I think that's quite, you've touched on a point there about regionality, and I want to come back to that as well, like saying it's in Scotland they have fairly well defined regions of where whiskey making happens, and I find regionality in Scotland to be fairly redundant. But do you think it's important in Australian whiskey, or do you think that's something we'll see in years to come?
I think it's pretty important because it's different here in Australia because we have such a dramatic change in climate because our country is so large.
Yeah.
So whiskey that we're aging here in Byron Bay is going to be so much different to the whiskey they're aging down in Tasmania.
Yeah.
And all around. So I think there will be the defining characteristics in each region. But then everyone having their own certain style.
Yeah. Very cool. Well, we've got one more dram to go, and then I think we'll be able to call it. So I need that's a spare. Here we go.
What do you think of the bourbon?
Oh,
Bourbon cask.
Batch 8. That's my pick. That's my pick.
You like it?
For those who are watching at home, Highwayman Batch 8, that's a good whiskey. That's a great whiskey. It's good fun. I don't know. I like those tropical sort of, there's almost that banana note, coconut, that kind of stuff. I love that in a whiskey though. Like that's my kind of jam. I like the tawny, but I pick the bourbon cask. But I always pick the bourbon cask. For those who are watching also, hashtag Team Refill. Bam. The Team Refill gang are on tonight. So good to see you all. And here's the best sound in the world. I'm going to pour a bit of the 190, 10.190, just a bit of peated whiskey for us to finish on. Bit of color in that. It's a second fill Oloroso 6-year-old. So quite young.
I love that a lot of my favorite Buna releases are 6, 7, 8 years old.
Yeah.
And just divine. Absolutely divine, whether peated or unpeated.
Yep.
For me, the hand fills and a lot of the Scotch Malt Whisky Society bottlings are just magnificent. A lot of the Adelphi bottlings, they're very, very good. And I really love the way that it illustrates the fact that age is irrelevant.
Yeah.
I go for flavor. Age is completely irrelevant.
Yeah, exactly. It's one of those. Again, I'll reference that this amazing conversation I had with Dr. Simmons about that. It's like age is just another number. It's like what was the temperature of your mash tun? What was the what was it? It's like all these numbers. Who cares? It's like the age. We like transparency. That's why we put the age statement on the bottle. But it doesn't tell you anything about the whiskey. It doesn't tell you anything about the taste or the flavor.
Yeah, exactly.
Oh, do you know what I'm getting on this whiskey? Shaved lead from a pencil. Not the actual wood, but the lead itself.
Shaved lead pencil.
Yeah. Yeah, it's beautiful. Crayon coming through. It's got such a beautiful funk to it.
So that was that very small peated runs of Bunnahabhain that come through from time to time. Always a bit of fun. Ooh. And Rebecca says, #team refill for life. Yeah, bruh. And Andy Davis says, agreed, age is nowhere near as important as the quality of the wood. Andy, yeah, that's exactly right. That's a very valid point. There we go. And Jeff Darby says, that's the way, your own way and style, respect, in response to your last comments.
Cheers, Jeff.
So lots of comments, lots of people tuning in. Thank you so much. If there's any other questions come through, we'll have them on just for a few more minutes. John Yanofsky says liquid pencil case in a glass by the sounds of it. That's a good. That
is.
That's the thing about whiskey. Like every flavor is utterly unique out of all these releases, and whether it be one of yours, whether it be one of ours, and the flavor profiles and the flavor that you can get out of a spirit are unbelievable, and the depth of that is part of the exploration of great whiskey. And I hope that forever continues. It's what it's about.
For me, that's what makes whiskey so special. Every single cask from every single distillery is completely different, and they all tell such an individual story. As you know, as a lot of people know, I have whiskey tattooed across my knuckles, and it's been about a decade since I actually had this done, about 8 or 9 years now. And I remember when I got it done, I'd already been completely obsessed with whiskey for a very long time. And a friend of mine that worked for an alcohol company saw that I had it done, and he giggled and said, what are you going to do when whiskey's not cool anymore? What are you going to do when tequila's the new thing? And I just looked at him and said, you just don't get it, do you, mate? This has been my life, and it will be my life forever. It is my dedication. It's my heart, my passion, my love, my everything.
Yeah.
It's what made me meet my beautiful wife.
Yeah.
If it wasn't for whiskey, I would have never met Billie.
Yeah, that's part of the fabric of the community and the people, and what makes whiskey what it is. It's the community, it's the people, it's making great spirit and having great experience. Yeah, the experience, exactly. And having great conversations like this one we've had tonight. So I really appreciate it. We have got a little bit over time, but I really appreciate you guys taking the time to chat with me tonight, to chat with all of our members. So many people tuning in. Thank you so much, everyone who's been tuning in tonight. Of course, can I just do a huge thanks to Billie-jean and Dan for being a part of this tonight. So thank you both of you for doing this. I hope to catch up with you both in Byron, of course, very soon. And
definitely, please.
And in the meantime, the lives will continue for the rest of this week, of course. Tomorrow night, we have Mark Vardson tuning in live from Highland Park. We have Thursday night with Julian White from Whiskey and Element, and Friday is the big members Zoom session. Hope to see all of you there. I'll finish with one last comment, which was from Louis Duckett, who says, do a layback and wouldn't have met me either, which would have been the true tragedy, he says. Yeah, you know what, Louis? I'm going to leave that one linger in the air like a bad smell, and I'll see you all. You two stay just right there, but I'll see you all tomorrow night for Mark Vardson. Thank you again to Billie-jean, Dan Woolley for being a part of tonight, and best of luck with everything in your endeavors.
Pleasure. Cheers. Thanks, guys.